My name is Runa Chatterjee. This is a presentation on self-directed learning and adult learning theory prepared for the EDUD 6301. My professor of record is Dr. Heinerman, Department of Educational Leadership, Lamar University, Texas. This presentation on self-directed learning, referred to as SDL henceforth, is divided into four big ideas, inspired by the book Self-Direction in Adult Learning, Perspectives on Theory, Research, and Practice by Brockett and Heimstra, 1991, and several other references throughout the presentation. The four big ideas are as follows: conceptual framework, research, implementation, and conclusion. And then in the end, there's bibliography. Big idea 1, conceptual framework. Formal establishment of the concept of SDL may have started taking place in the early 1960s. However, SDL may have been the primary method of learning before mankind began to set up institutions of learning. There are numerous records of theorists and their work on SDL. Here are a few of those. Howell 1961 classified adult learners as goal, activity, and learning-oriented. Tufts' 1971 research led to the discovery adults prefer to plan and direct their own learning. Knowles' 1975 developed teaching and learning guide for SDL concept. In 1982, Commission of Professors of Adult Education established a task force on SDL. Long in 1986 began annual international symposium on SDL. There are three definitions that we will address in this presentation. Definition 1 of 3. In its broadest meaning, SDL describes a process in which individuals take the initiative, with or without the help of others, in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating learning outcomes. Knowles, 1975. Definition 2 of 3. Tufts 1978 defined SDL from the perspective of a learning project that includes deliberate efforts to build knowledge, develop skills, or make changes. Definition 3 of 3. Inspired by an opportunity to take an advantage of a learning situation, learning to attain a goal, ongoing process of searching for a new learning by Clardy 2000. According to Brockett and Heimstra, when a learner adopts the responsibility of learning independently, there are two dimensions that can influence success. External pertains to the instructional process, and internal pertains to the learner's own approach towards learning. An extremely simplified flowchart of SDL process can be expressed into 4 steps, and I will describe these with an example. Imagine a person wanting to get certified as a swim official with USA Swimming. Assessing readiness would be, am I ready to take swim official certification exam? Setting goals, I will take the exam within 6 weeks. Engage in learning would include studying from usaswimming.com and watching YouTube videos. Evaluation of outcomes will be passing the certification exam. There are different pathways that SDL can take. Linear is where the learner is completing one task after the other. Interactive, where the learning is taking place independently yet influenced by external factors. Instructional, where SDL is a carefully planned module designed by an adult instructor. PRO, Personal Responsibility Orientation Model, by Brockett and Heimstra in 1991, makes a distinction between the learner and the instructional characteristics. SDL is thought to be a continuum that begins with the desire of the adults to learn, which happens in an environment of teaching and learning rather than taking place in isolation. Brockett and Heimstra 2012 responded to the criticism surrounding the term personal responsibility and modified their model into PPC, Personal Process Context, to include the learner, context in which learning takes place, and instructional environment. A sound balance between the three factors is desirable for effective learning. Many theorists have attempted to develop tools to help understand the attributes of SDL. Here are four of those. SDL Readiness Scale by Guglielmo, 1977, for identifying and measuring SDL attitudes and behaviors. ADI's Continuing Learning Inventory for measurement of attributes of self-directed learning with continuing learners, ADI 1986. Self-Directed Learning Perception Scale by Piley-Cormick in 1998 to investigate learners' perceptions about helpful things for pursuing SDL. Pro-SDLS Stockdale 2003 used in higher education classroom setting based on personal responsibility orientation. Big idea, research. Two streams of research have evolved: the quantitative measurement of self-direction through written instruments and the use of qualitative methods such as observation and interviewing as found in Brockett and Heimstra 1991. Several people used SDLRS instrument and documented following findings in their quantitative research. Terence and Murad 1978 found significant positive correlations between SDLR and creativity. Sabagjian 1980 found strong positive relationship between the self-image of adult and their self-directedness. Hall Johnson 1986 found evidence for the link between self-directed readiness and actual learning involvement. Reynolds 1986 found self-directed readiness to be higher when there was a desire to learn rather than by the external forces. Several researchers have collected information from the learners in their natural settings to understand the process and made the following conclusions. Gibbons et al. 1980 found that learners studied despite many odds and formal schooling had little to contribute if they were allowed to use their natural skills and expertise. Brookfield 1981 supported Knowles 1975 that self-direction does not take place in isolation when they found that learners acknowledged peers' accomplishments and invited feedback. SDL was found to be a continuum rather than discrete topic. Lian and Cisco 1981 observed that SDL happened in everyday setting while interacting with the environment. Needed thinking usually began after the end goal was visualized, was enjoyable due to self-paced learning and absence of judgment from an instructor. Big Idea 3, Implementation. Important factors in the implementation of SDL. Facilitate. Even though an instructor does not impart lessons directly, tools such as planning activities, selection of books, suggestion of online resources, assistance with pacing, etc. can facilitate SDL. Enhance. Adult instructor recognizes factors internal to the learner. They promote critical thinking to question situations and applying newly acquired knowledge into present situation. Enhances learner self-direction. Apps 1985 suggested activities such as reading to help gain broader perspective, writing like keeping a journal to document thinking, promote taking personal responsibility of growth. Fostering SDL, several steps can be taken in being mindful about making self-directed learning an integral part of adult learning. Decision makers of curriculum need to undergo training to understand the significance of SDL. Adult learners need to be convinced about the usefulness of SDL and that it does not compromise the quality of learning when it is carefully planned by the adult educators. Making resources available such as libraries, museums, self-help programs, institutional programs, etc. should be made freely available. According to Brookfield 1985, adults are considered to be in control of much of what they learn. This puts the instructors in a role of facilitators and does not allow a lot of opportunities to express their own views, experiences, and ideas. However, in his interviews with adult learners, Brookfield learned that much of adult learning took place in social context and that the learners were not opposed to seeking information from the experts. When trying to implement SDL, student characteristics at play would be readiness to learn, willing to monitor and adjust, while the instructor purposefully lets the learner remain in charge while building a conducive environment for SDL. Learning contract. In his study at an Italian university, Fedeli et al. 2013 expressed on page 105 that learning contracts replace content plan with process plan. It helps the learner with organization, estimate time required, method of learning, and determine evidence of mastery. Although there were positive responses towards the use of a learning contract, in some cases the participants of the study expressed apprehension stating that a learning contract can produce overcommitment and result in negative feelings towards the learning process. Based on the model of a learning contract by Knowles 1986, a sample of a learning contract with suggested items is included. Big idea for conclusion. Few of the commonly heard myths about SDL and their refutations are as follows. Myth number 1, all or nothing. Brockett and Heimstra 1985 believed that self-directedness is best viewed as a continuum rather than as some dichotomous model. Here, self-direction is viewed as a characteristic that exists to a greater or lesser degree in all persons and in all situations. Myth number 2. SDL is meant for free, affluent, and democratic societies. In some circumstances, learners experience unfavorable external pressures to learn. For example, incarcerated people will take much longer to be self-directed. However, that is a risk worth taking, even if the progress is slow. Majority of adults from all walks of life are actively involved in self-directed learning projects, though the number of projects involved and the amount of time spent on those projects were quite diverse. Myth number 3. SDL is a threat to the quality of institutional programs. The traditional notion that teachers are experts and learners should be willing receivers of that expert knowledge makes it difficult for SDL to maximize learning. Responsibility for quality learning must reside with the learner in situations where individual initiative is expected. Myth number 4. Best approach for adults is SDL. There's value of promoting SDL in adult learning, but there will be times when utilizing an individualized learning approach may not be appropriate. It's important to ask practical and ethical questions. Myth number 5. Limited to reading and writing tasks. A wide variety of learning activities and approaches generally are used to encourage learners to take personal responsibility for their own learning. For example, investigation, study groups, visiting places, internship, debates, forums, etc. Recommendations for successful implementation of SDL are as follows. SDL is not an overnight process. For an instructor trying to adopt learner autonomy, it is important to consider that it is a time-consuming process. Francis 2017 believes it will require a careful planning and forecast by expert educators to integrate meaningful SDL such that the learners are deriving the intended advantage from this method of instruction. SDL should be supportive and not instructive. Recommendation of Francis 2017 to the instructors is to lead learners to engage in self-assessment rather than trying very hard to engage the learners in the activities. Acceptance of diverse learning preferences. By allowing learners to access material in informal manner and locations, we can make SDL more approachable. Availability of free resources such as MIT OpenCourseWare, TED Talks, Khan Academy, etc. allow for learner autonomy and choice. Allow realization of personal passion in self-directed learning. Many learners adopt SDL to fulfill lifelong desire to achieve a goal or pursue something personal. It may not result in a certificate or a diploma every time. Courses offered as SDL should include elements of fun, embed opportunities to build something abstract or tangible at the end of the course, which can be symbolic of attainment of personal goal. Applications of SDL. Due to proliferation of internet-based training modules, more adult learners can utilize this resource to learn outside of traditional learning within institutions. Educational leaders such as MIT envisioned adults' desire of fulfillment of long or short-term goals and thereby improving self-worth and becoming equipped for better opportunities. Contrary to the misconception about SDL happening in isolation, it can give rise to formation of communities between like-minded adult learners. This is the end of my presentation. Following two slides contain bibliography. Thank you.